the platform and you saw that your podcast wasn't there anymore? Like how does censorship manifest itself?
Most of the time it's just gone even without notifying you. And sometimes it's also gone by, and you receive a system message saying that this podcast is against some law, and which is a very vague law, or some specific legal provisions, which is oftentimes about pornographic description, something like that. So you broke that law, and then this episode was gone, or this whole podcast was gone. So, but also censorship manifests itself in a more implicit way as well, because oftentimes it's in our own mind, because we definitely internalize censorship. And for example, in our when we are making a podcast, we're already thinking like maybe this one is going to be censored, or should I say this, or if I said something and then I may edit it out because maybe this is unsafe. So we are running this giant censorship machine on our own as well.
This is the effect of censorship by the state, is that you learn that habit, you as you say, you internalize the habit of censorship so that the state doesn't have to censor you anymore. You censor yourself. And I know what this is like. You don't need to live in a totalitarian government to know what it's like to internally censor yourself. We do it all the time. Let's say if you're with a group of people who hold different beliefs than you do, you don't say certain things, or if you're with your family and there's a certain, thing that you never talk about with your family, you just do that naturally. And I think that's something, while it is, let's say, a quote unquote normal thing that we do just to get through our everyday lives, it's still important to be aware of when we're doing it and why we feel the need to do that.
Totally. I really agree with you that oftentimes people project censorship only on to China or to other totalitarian countries, but it's happening everywhere. And I think it's I don't know if you read Foucault. So he talks about this kind of panopticon, which is a prison without guards, basically, because everyone is looking at each other, and so everyone is like internalized that shape, that whole structure, that system, and then you don't even need a big brother.
And that's what I was thinking. You have all these little brothers and little sisters, which is what happened in the communist regime. I mean, it's still a communist regime, but that's what happened in the Cultural Revolution, is that you had neighbors spying on neighbors, family members spying on family members, and everybody was a spy. How has it affected you to be a famous podcaster?
I wouldn't consider myself famous still, because China is so big. Having 100,000 followers is not that.
For everything in Chinese standards, it's like if you take everything in Chinese standards and you multiply it by 10, then that's actually the scale.
Or 100,000, I don't know. So for me, I never consider myself famous, and but indeed, I do consider this whole podcast and myself having some influence. I think during the years while I was doing this podcast, I did feel this kind of responsibility to continue, and also sometimes to deliver better quality content. And I liked this whole identity, which can make me very easy to socialize with people. For example, with you, like, because I remember when we first met, we were both like kind of maybe I don't know whose projection, but we didn't.
Were you doing the mutual avoidance of Asian people thing?
Yeah, something like that. That's very typical, huh? So we have that kind of mutual avoidance. I want to discuss this topic with you, like this kind of avoidance. How do you understand that? Because even nowadays, I'm so aware of it. I still sometimes, if I bump into an Asian face in a yoga studio, for example, after class, I still I don't know how to approach them, and maybe I also, part of me is not very interested if the the look is not very open, welcoming, or no, it's not that I only want to hang out with open and liberal people, but I also, like you said, I never know how interesting a person can be. So, but still, there's some layer of ice that I don't know how to break. Whereas I can easily break ice with a European,
I'm really glad that you brought this topic up because it's actually the reason why I started this podcast. I have spent a lot of my childhood and my, growing up years running away from my cultural identity, running away from being Chinese and being Asian. When I was young, it was a huge part of my identity. I would introduce myself as, "Hi, I'm Sen, I'm Chinese Canadian." And because I was born in China, we immigrated when I was 6 to Calgary in Canada. And at that time, there weren't that many other Chinese immigrants or Mandarin-speaking Chinese immigrants. There were a lot of Cantonese-speaking immigrants. And so I thought it was really important that I label myself as Chinese Canadian. And as I grew up, also because I moved to Montreal when I was 18, the label of Chinese Canadian or hyphen Canadian became superseded by a larger political narrative, which was, are you an Anglophone or a Francophone? Because I was living in Quebec. And that conversation became much more important, at least the way that I felt about it, was much more important in society than necessarily what kind of hyphenated Canadian you are. So for a long time, it wasn't something that was discussed. Also because a lot of the Asians that I knew were French-speaking Asians. So that was a whole other kind of, experience of being Asian that I didn't have any familiarity with. And so for all of the time that I was living in Montreal, I didn't think of myself as Chinese. I thought of myself as an Anglophone Canadian. And then when I came to Europe, that was 5.5 years ago, then I was North American. It wasn't so much that I was a hyphenated Anglophone Chinese Canadian anymore. It was, okay, you speak English like a North American. That's what you are. So, it's kind of like everywhere that I've gone, the question of being Asian started to fade in importance, and became replaced by larger societal narratives. But these days, I feel like I have kind of moved far enough away from my own Chinese identity, Asian identity, that I feel like I have a lot more perspective on it than I did when I was younger. And I also see that there's a lot of good that comes from having that kind of background. And there are many parts of myself which are undeniably Chinese, undeniably Asian. But those parts may be different from somebody else. Who's undeniably Asian. They're just different. And there are so many interesting people like yourself, who are, fortunately in my life, who have approached their, how they integrate their Asian roots with the branches of the rest of their life. And I feel like I have a lot to learn from these people in my life. And so that's why I'm now much more interested in talking to people who are living really interesting lives and who still maintain some part of their Asianness. So that's kind of like the long background of of where I'm coming from with this, and how I navigate this mutual Asian avoidance is, practically, I think that going to places or going to events where you feel like that resonates with your values and you see other people who look like you there's a greater chance that you're going to be able to connect with them. Like, for example, when we connected at the acting course, that wasn't like running into any Chinese person at the Asian grocery store, right? Which is like the lowest common denominator for Asian people. We all have to go to the Asian superstore. So I guess that would be my answer, and that would be my answer for anyone looking for any kind of resonance with their community, is to just do the things that you like to do, and naturally you will find your community there. And you might find people who are of your ethnicity or not. But I think it's also different for me versus you, because I don't speak Chinese as naturally. Like, it doesn't come as naturally to me to approach people in Chinese. Whereas I think for you, it's still, both are good for you, right?
Well, that can be weird, though. It can be awkward, because sometimes you thought this person is Chinese and you approach in Chinese, but they're not, or they're either Dutch Chinese who doesn't speak any Chinese, or they're like Japanese or Korean, which can be very embarrassing. So I don't approach people nowadays by just speaking Chinese. But now I also think of another tricky thing, because it's always hard for me to ask where you're from, or this question itself is already like super weird, right? So that's also definitely part of the reason why I couldn't, I almost become speechless. I don't know how to, after I say hi, we say something, and there's inevitably there is a moment where we're going to ask where you're from, or where you're, it's so weird. It's because I don't like people who ask me where I'm from. It's right. So I don't also dare to ask people.
Yes. Yeah, I can totally relate. Just the other week, I met someone who was, we were at a Toastmasters class, and he was clearly of either Chinese or Taiwanese or something, very close to my descent, but he was speaking perfect English. He was speaking perfect German. And so we were walking, and I looked at him and I said, so I'm going to ask you the question. And he's like, what question? I was like, what question? But I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to ask you the question. He was like, oh, where am I from? I was like, that's the question, but I'm not going to ask it.
I like it.
I think it illustrates to me that we all have this human curiosity to know where people are from, what their origins are. And it gave me just a little bit of compassion for other people who ask me the same question. So when I say other people, I mean non-Asian people. Typically people not of color, because usually, I don't know, like I just don't take it as seriously when people of color ask me where I'm from. If I'm at the Vietnamese restaurant, or if I, am at an event where there's a lot of diversity, people ask me where I'm from. It's fine. It's normal. I feel much more sensitive to that question when it's the first and only thing that people are interested in. And there's not any deeper question about what is your life like, or if we're at an event, talking about the event, what do you think about, what the speaker said, when the only question is about my heritage. And that's when I try to fuck with people.
How would you respond?
Which is, it's just that, so the truth is I was born in China and I grew up in Canada. But when I detect that there's that, like, I just want to know where your face is from, I'll just say I'm from Canada, which could very well be true because many people are from Canada or from anywhere else that they're from. And then they look and then they ask the second question, you know what the second question is, right?
Where are you really from? Or where do your parents come from?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Or it might just be like a comment, like, but you look like from... and insert any other Asian country, I'm like, and then I just am very simple, like almost stupidly simple. I'm like, no, I'm from Canada, and I feel only a little bit bad about this because I don't give this answer to people when I feel like they're just the where are you from piece is just one little part, and they're just like, okay, cool, I just know what your background is, and now I'm going to talk about other stuff with you like you're a regular person. Or I also don't take as much issue when it's other Asian people asking me, because they want to, I think they want to make a connection. Like, did you also come over from Vietnam during that whole migration? Or did you also come over from Korea when all the Korean nurses were like, they just want to place me and understand where I fit into the community. I gain compassion for other people when I want to ask other Asian people where they're from. Yeah. But I try to ask it in, I don't know, so a little bit more of an interesting way, a little bit more creative,
Teach me how do you...
Well, some other subtle ways of asking that question, questions would be, if I'm encountering, an Asian person in Berlin, I would ask them, so how long have you been in Berlin? Because Berlin is also a place of a lot of travelers who come and go and everything. And if they say, oh, I'm from Berlin, I was like, okay, great. Now I know you were born here. Now I can change the way that I speak in terms of like, what kind of narrative do I use? Because I'm going to talk to you as if you are a European, because you are. But if someone then says, oh, I've been in Berlin for 3 years, and then I might ask them, well, where were you living before Berlin? And if they say, well, I was, I came here as a student because, I got a scholarship from Thailand or something, then I would, okay, then now I know that you spent your life growing up in Thailand and you only arrived in Europe 3 years ago. That's a different kind of narrative. So I guess it's, it is all about like trying to understand